All right, guys, how's it going? I got a new video here. There's a couple of different facets to it, but we'll get into it. It's conservative advocate moms blast Columbus Academy for expelling their kids. Before we get into that, if you want to support me or follow me, you can do that on Subscribestar. And before we get into that, there's kind of an issue here too. We need to kind of look at what critical race theory is, or who says what it is, because you can get like different definitions from like different people depending like who you ask. Because when you get into it here, like Wikipedia, which Wikipedia isn't really a trusted source anymore. They become biased and they hide behind being called the free encyclopedia. But they want to call it, they're saying critical race theory is a body of legal scholarship and academic movement of civil rights scholars and activists in the United States that seek to critically examine U.S. law as it interacts with issues of race in the U.S. and to challenge mainstream American liberal approaches to racial justice. CRT examines social, cultural, and legal issues primarily as they relate to race and racism in the United States. Now, if you go to Britannica here, they have something a little different. They have critical race theory, intellectual movement and loosely organized framework of legal analysis based on the premise that race is not a natural, biologically grounded feature of physically distinct subgroups of human beings, but a socially constructed, culturally invented category that is used to oppress and exploit people of color. There's that whole oppress thing. It's used to oppress people and exploit people of color. In the U.S. today, okay. Critical race theories hold that the law and legal institutions of the United States are inherently racist insofar as they function to create and maintain social, economic, and political inequalities between whites and non-whites, especially African Americans. I kind of wonder how like affirmative action plays into that too, because there's like certain people that like don't get the job even though they have better qualifications because they don't meet the diversity quota of like hiring. Because it's not only affecting like certain like white males are like losing potential positions of jobs to say women and like blacks and I guess Hispanics and stuff, but it's also affecting, especially in the tech world too, it's affecting like Asian men and Indian men as well, because they're like, oh, there's already too many of you here. We need to hire other people so we can have up our diversity. It's like these certain like a lot of these like leftist policies are like into corporate and into school and government and stuff, and it's like affecting not just like people are not being treated equally based on the content of their character. Like their race now is being like either a plus or minus whether they get whatever position they're going for, which is kind of antithetical of what the civil rights movement is supposed to be. And this is the issue too with Harvard College. Like they literally had, you figured you go to like Harvard College, you have to like get a certain like SAT score to get in. But they were literally having like, if you were like African American, you could have like a lower SAT score to get in versus like Asian Americans and stuff. Like they were like literally discriminating against Asian Americans because like, oh, there's too many of you here. You work too hard. Your social structure, your nuclear family is too good. So it's like, it's the whole, and here's the issue too. This kind of like ties into them wanting to be like instead of equality of opportunity, they want equality of outcome. They want everybody to be equal, which if you look at any like communist country or socialist country, like they're all like equally poor and starving, because this like stems from all this stuff. We'll get into it right here. What is critical race theory? In order to understand the problem of critical race training in higher education, parents and students need to understand what critical race theory is and how it is implemented. As discussed below, critical race theory is not the traditional civil rights movement, which sought to provide equal opportunity and dignity without regard to race. Rather, critical race theory and the training to implement it is a radical ideology that focuses on race as the key to understanding society and objectifies people based on race. What is critical race theory? An outgrowth of the European Marxist school of critical theory. Critical race theory is an academic movement which seeks to link racism, race, and power, unlike the civil rights movement, which sought to work within the structures of American democracy. Critical race theorists challenge the very foundations of the liberal order, such as rationalism, constitutional law, and legal reasoning. Critical race theorists argue that American social life, political structures, and economic systems are founded upon race, which in their view is a social construct. Systematic racism, in the eyes of critical race theory, stems from the dominance of race in American life. Critical race theories and anti-racist advocates argue that because race is a predominant part of American life, racism itself has become internalized into the American conscious. It is because of this, they argue, that there have been significantly different legal and economic outcomes between the different racial groups. So a lot of these people say it's not good enough to like not be racist. You have to be anti-racist. And a lot of times to them, what that actually ends up being is like it's okay to be racist towards white people. Like there's like this movement, like they want to. I've talked to some of them too, or maybe we have interactions online, and they want to be like, CRT is like acknowledging that America was built on the slavery and the genocide of the Indians. I'm like, well, technically, if you like, yes, America was part of slavery, and they did conquer Native American Indian land. But conquering land between different tribes of Native Americans was already happening. You know, they'd come in, they'd like, depending on what tribe it was, I guess some were peaceful, some were warring. They'd come in, conquer the land, you know, scalp their enemies, kill the men, rape the women. They'd take some of them in as slaves into their tribe. But when like the Europeans came over and they had like, the technology was better, they had guns, you know, versus bow and arrows, they conquered them. That's what has happened for thousands of years. And they want to pinpoint that specific thing, but they also don't want to look at like, oh, well, how about this Indian tribe that conquered that Indian tribe? They don't care about that. And they kind of want to give American Indians like this kind of like Disney-fied thing, like, oh, they were just sitting in their teepees and smoking tobacco and being peaceful, when a lot of them were like warring among each other. They were like hunting and fishing like certain animals into like near extinction. Like this like Disney-fied idea of them is like not true. But and with the whole slavery aspect, like slavery was brought to the British colonies because of Britain. It's because they were bringing them from Africa because other Africans were selling Africans into slavery, and America was built upon that in a way, but also America like ended slavery. Like slavery was only in America for, was it like maybe like 90 years, less than 90 years, and they like America like ended slavery. I mean, there's still slavery of actual people going on today, and you can go to Africa and buy a slave today. But people want to complain about, or they think they should be owed something because somebody that may or may not have a skin color similar to them might have been a slave by somebody else like 150, 200 years ago. So it's kind of weird how they do that. But also another issue to it is, like, you'll bring up, like, a lot of it's like semantics as well. They'll be like, oh, well, we're not actually teaching doctrine of CRT. Like, we're not specifically saying we're teaching this. But what they're doing is, like, they're taking that ideology, that lens through which they view and think things, and they're applying that to other things. So, an example of this this may be a long video. An example of this we can find on Sydney Watson's Twitter. She has a YouTube channel. You can check that out as well. But here we can like watch this. It's like a minute and a half. And like, oh, we're not teaching the actual theoretical fundamentals of critical race theory, but they are doing this.
My name is Allison Dempsey. This year I'm teaching 5th grade social studies in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. Racist teaching and learning is upholding the systems and sort of like the classroom hierarchy. Inquiry-based learning challenges that model because the children guide the learning. So what are some racial differences that you've noticed around you? Who would like to share?
Now keep in mind, these are like small children. They look like they're like, I don't know, maybe 8 to like 10 years old or something like that, or maybe even younger. So it's like, it's probably like, but somewhere between like K through 6. Like these are like young children.
People are different, so they get treated based on like how they look, and who decided that is like the dominant culture.
What is the
And like kids are very young and very impressionable too. That's why other stuff that like, because it's kind of like because like leftists kind of like infiltrated. They're like in the government for sure now, and they have been like in higher education for a while, and then like it's kind of like seeping down into like the K through 12 curriculum as well.
the dominant culture? What does the dominant culture do?
They like, make people believe certain stereotypes about a certain group of people, not just blacks, but also browns or indigenous, anybody whose skin color is darker. Dominant culture.
So they're like teaching these kids to like view people not on who the person is, but like first, it's like the whole CRT thing. Like first, you have to view them whether they're white or whether they're black and brown. And because they're white, I don't care if it's an 8-year-old white kid, you're evil. You have white skin, 8-year-old kid that's done nothing in your life, you're evil. You're oppressing the brown person. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like they're teaching like this like misinformation and this like wrong history to like these impressionable kids.
Culture is for powerful people with power, and white people make other people think that black people are bad. So that's why black people don't have power.
If a white person kills a black person, they call it self-defense. But if a black person kills a white person, it says murder.
And these, you got to think about it too, because you have like these like Generation Z, like a lot of these are like spouting this stuff, and you're kind of like wondering like, where did you learn this? And there's a good chance that like a lot of this has been taught the last 10 or 15 years in school. It's just that like the whole pandemic issue from last year, which forced a lot of like remote learning, then parents could actually hear what the teacher was saying, because it's like a lot of the teachers like freaking out, like, oh, well, if the parents listen in, they'll know what we're teaching the kids. Like they were having an issue with that. So it's if you have kids, keep an eye on this stuff in school.
That's how unfair like black people's life is.
They actually knew it. They actually said everything.
And it's horrible too, because we have like this like a lot of this is like perpetrated by like these like white savior complex like liberal people. They're like, oh, black people can't fend for themselves. This is the whole thing with the voter ID thing as well. Like, oh, black people don't know how to go to the DMV. They can't afford to get a license. They're not competent to have like the internet and be able to do anything. Like they're like saying like, oh, we're against racist, but we're like using these like yeah, black people aren't like, they're not capable of doing this. Well, they're black people. They're not like us. Like they're not capable of getting an ID. I'm like, do you hear yourself? And they want to call like other people like racist, and it's really just them like, I don't know, like projecting like their self-hatred onto the other people. That was a long, long intro. So the actual story here is, if you're still here, we'll get into this. And this kind of surprised me because it's like a private school. Like a lot of this I kind of expect from like public schools, because public schools usually do not as well as private schools, because private schools usually have funding, whether they're in more wealthier neighborhoods or they have like more funding from the state. And especially like inner city public schools kind of do worse because like they don't have as much funding. But we'll get into this. Columbus, Ohio. 2 moms are speaking out after their kids were kicked out of school because of the parents' belief and actions. But I kind of had to go over all of that as kind of an intro to be able to like set this up to get into this. The 2 have been campaigning against what opponents call critical race theory, and said Columbus Academy, one of the most well-known private schools in Ohio, expelled their kids. Several hundred parents have joined the pro-CA Columbus Academy Coalition. Organizers said they believe Columbus Academy is discriminating against conservative thinking and pushing progressive ideas of race. The school said Andrea Gross and Emily Gonzalez leveled false and misleading attacks on Columbus Academy and its leadership. They have a letter that they sent to them, if you want to go through and read it through here. Columbus Academy sent a letter to the 2 families informing them oh no, what happened? There we go. Their 3 children will not be re-enrolled at the school this fall. One of the children is a high school junior and has attended school since kindergarten. I believe they are trying to send a message to the other members of a coalition that if you speak out and you ask questions, that they will punish your innocent children, and our members are afraid, Gross said. Separating people by the color of the skin is regressive, and we are not just anti-racist, we are also pro-human. So it seems like, because here's the issue too, I think with private schools, you don't get as much ability, because public schools are like state schools, so they're like taxpayer funded, so you have the ability to interact more in your child's curriculum with asking questions and stuff. But I also don't understand, even though it's a private school, I also don't understand why they can't just kind of explain what's going on or what specifically they're teaching. But there is this movement of, I guess, parents kind of like realizing this is going on, then like trying to interact more and figure out what exactly their kids are learning at school. In the letter that alerted the families they were expelled, head of school Melissa Soderberg said the 2 women had pursued a course of action that has been anything but civil, respectful, and faithful to the facts. I said the families have caused pain and even fear for physical safety among students, families, faculties, and staff. Now, it seems like, in my opinion, that they were like asking and prodding and poking, and trying to get like questions going on. And maybe for some reason the school didn't like that. Then they kind of like expelled them on this like technicality. Because I guess there's like a legal thing that they signed saying, we'll get into it down here. I think it brings it up. But it's like kind of like this chapter 9 section of this form that they signed that like, we're fearing for our safety now because you're asking questions about what we're teaching your children. And we'll watch this little clip too. And it said it's the FAIR is the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism.
I'm Amy Gonzalez.
And I'm Andrea Gross.
We are both moms, and our kids attend Columbus Academy. So why would the administration at Columbus Academy decide to treat us as a threat?
Unfortunately, an intolerant orthodoxy has invaded our children's education. Columbus Academy is teaching students that they are either a victim or an oppressor.
This kind of goes into the white fragility thing, which is written by Robin DiAngelo, which from my understanding, it's like this person was essentially like a white person that was in fact like racist towards like black people. And they're like, oh, well, if I'm a white person that's racist towards black people, then every other white person is racist towards black people. And like this whole leftist thing I was talking about earlier, like where they're taking what they have and like they're projecting it onto everybody else. Because I wondered if that school is also teaching Mein Kampf. I mean, wouldn't you want to know about the National Socialists and like how to prevent that as well? Or is that off the reading list?
oppressor based on immutable characteristics like their skin color and gender.
Our children and all of the other children at the school deserve an education that emphasizes forgiveness, optimism, and gratitude. We seek transparency and accountability from leadership at Columbus Academy.
We are excited to be joining the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. Please join FAIR and stand up for positive, pro-human values.
If we want to go right here.
Value. Please join.
Because I know Daryl Davis, he's the guy that actually went in. Like, he was like, I believe he was like a jazz and blues singer that went and met up with like KKK members and actually converted them. Because a lot of them like grew up in areas where there were like no black people, and they were like taught that as they were growing up. And he went in and he like converted like KKK members like out of the KKK through the interactions of him.
Fair and stand up for positive,
Trying to see if
pro-human values.
Let's pause that. Okay. It just doesn't add up. The fact they are trying to portray us as physically violent just doesn't add up, said Gross. The coalition said they pressed the administration and board members for information on what is being taught in the classroom. Here's the thing, too. Like, why is that not... The administrators and the teachers should be absolutely forthcoming with what they're teaching. And if they're not, that's like a massive red flag. Because previously I would say, if you're able to, don't send your kids to public school, either like private school or homeschool. But this is a private school, so it seems to be like infiltrating that as well. Maybe it's like the private school in like the major metropolitan areas, so it seemed to like lean left and like Democrat, and that seems to be like intertwined with their policies. Because I wonder if like private Christian schools would like, I would assume they wouldn't tolerate with, because like I'm not like a practicing Christian or anything. I'd call myself like agnostic, but I'd probably put my children in like a private Christian school because that seems like a better thing than like all this other stuff. Or homeschool. Homeschool's probably even better as well. The coalition said they pressed the administration on board members for information on what's being taught in the classroom. The mom said they did not feel heard. People feel marginalized, intimidated, isolated, and ultimately discriminated against, Gross said. When they are bringing DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it just doesn't seem like inclusive. It just doesn't seem like inclusivity. Seems more like inherent bigotry, said Gonzalez, whose daughter is Latina. Columbus Academy would not answer our questions on camera. A parent who is backing the Academy's decisions said what she heard from the coalition moms on the national podcast, Blunt Force Truth, was unsettling. The language is very incendiary, and I actually contacted the school after that podcast, says Catherine Mallory, who has had 4 children in the private school. We know these were children. We know there were children recording their class lectures and discussions in class at the urging of the parents. I think there is a chilling of discussion in the classroom that I think is really problematic. Teachers aren't like the ultimate authority and everything they say is correct. They need to be questioned on what they say and what they teach. Unfortunately, I think I've said this in previous episodes before, but like people that spend their entire life or the majority of their lives like in school, kind of like it seems like a amount of them when they actually get out into the workforce, if they get out into the workforce, like they follow and take orders, because it says schools are like built to make people for like manufacturing industry instead of like being taught to think for themselves in critical ways. Mallory said the pandemic likely did not help with difficult conversations. The school does not teach per se critical race theory. We don't teach the actual teachings via the book, but we just use that lens and teach through that. It's kind of like when the North Koreans teach math. They're like, oh, if you have a grenade and there's like 3 evil Americans there, and it kills one evil American, how many evil Americans are there? Like, they're not necessarily saying that Americans are evil, right? They're just teaching math with a little bit of that lens put on there. The school does not teach per se critical race theory. There are certainly components the students, especially in the upper school, are exposed to, but they are not taught how to think, and they are not told what to think. So they're not taught that white people are the evil oppressors of black people, I wonder. Mallory said, I think it is heart-wrenching that the children are sort of collateral damage. The coalition mom said they just wanted to make sure all sides are represented to students, and that likely won't happen. That is the cancel culture mentality, unfortunately, is being promoted by our headmasters and board of directors, especially, said Gross, which I think, like I was saying before, I think they probably have like less avenues of approach just because it is a private school versus a public school, unfortunately. I believe they are trying to send a message to the other members of a coalition that if you speak out and you ask questions, that they will punish your innocent children, said Gross. So if you have children, I would definitely make sure you keep an eye on what is being taught to them. And yeah, this was definitely a longer one. But I had to go over like all this other stuff to kind of talk about this one because I haven't talked about this specifically on my channel yet. But you can like this video and subscribe and follow on the different platforms. Like I said, YouTube, Facebook, Minds, Gab, BitChute. Also, I'm putting it on Anchor as audio only, which goes out to Spotify and other audio podcasts if you want to listen to this while you're driving or at work or whatever. Then if you do want to follow or help support me, I got my subscribe star here, which will be in the description. All right, if you have any questions or comments or anything, you can put it in the comments section. All right, later.